to read what I have for a description rather than to try to clue you in. I have been an RN for now 50 years and 40 years experience as hospital and long-term care nurse. Instructor for Indian Hills Community College for the last 9 years. I've now been gone for about 3 years from the college. Teaching classes in long-term care, nurse aid, rehab aid, medic first aid, daycare first aid, CPR, dependent adult abuse, in services for nursing homes on a monthly basis, DDCI, which means chronic illness, license criteria for people who work in Alzheimer's units, and they are to have 6 hours of training before they work in an Alzheimer's unit. Activity directors, EMT, nursing homes and hospitals, and last but not least, caregiver for an Alzheimer's victim for now 20 years, and now 1 year's experience as spouse of an Alzheimer's victim in a nursing home. He has now been there 8 years. It became necessary for me to put him there simply because I was not old enough to draw my Social Security. We could have lived on his, but I could not pay my Blue Cross Blue Shield, or I could not pay my car payments with his money. And so therefore I had no choice. I couldn't stay up 24 hours a day, and so I went my way. He is in a nursing home, and I go twice a day when I'm home. I go twice a day to see that he has his meals, and to turn him, kind of keep an eye on his skin care and that kind of thing. And I find that comforting for me, and seems to be doing him well as well. I want you to think through some of these things. I'm going to read the questions, and just in your mind, think true or false. And then as we go through what we're going to talk about today, hopefully in the next hour, you'll find the right answers to these things, okay? Think about it, true or false. Memory loss is part of the normal aging process. Everybody is going to have a memory loss, regardless of what goes on. Yes or no, true or false. Alzheimer's is a disease which progresses at an individual rate. True or false. Avoidance of overstimulation is important to the individual with advanced Alzheimer's disease. The only loss produced by Alzheimer's disease is a progressive decline in memory. Persons with Alzheimer's disease should be allowed to wander in a safe, secure environment. When a person with Alzheimer's disease shows signs of increasing confusion or stress, quiet surroundings may be helpful in managing the individual's behavior. Repeatedly asking questions is a symptom of the memory loss of Alzheimer's disease. When a patient with Alzheimer's disease becomes accusatory, it is best to deny the accusation and remind the person of his disease process. Maintaining a routine is important to the person with Alzheimer's disease. Introduction of new and unfamiliar activities and tasks are a way to prevent boredom in persons with Alzheimer's disease. Physical exercise should be avoided by the person with Alzheimer's disease because it increases the person's stress level. Rest periods should not be planned for the person with Alzheimer's disease in order to assure sleeping throughout the night. Generally, the cause for acting out or behaviors that are inappropriate, behaviors in the patient with Alzheimer's disease is the loss of ability to cope with stress. Generally, the cause for acting out behaviors in the patient with Alzheimer's disease is the loss of ability to cope with stress. Alzheimer's disease is easily diagnosed. Radios and TVs are usually good ways to keep persons with Alzheimer's disease in touch with the world. Persons with Alzheimer's disease should be made to stay in bed all night so that they can get their sleep. Persons with Alzheimer's disease should learn more if they would only try. Persons with Alzheimer's disease require the same nutrition as those of the same age and amount of activity. Persons with Alzheimer's disease may step high over cracks or lines in the floor because they misinterpret what they see. There is a continual decrease in sex drive from the early to the late stages of Alzheimer's disease. The loss of ability to recognize the urge to go to the bathroom can be a reason for Alzheimer's patients to have bowel and bladder problems. And the effects of Alzheimer's disease is dependent on size and location of lesions within the brain. We'll go through that at the end, and we'll see what we can come up with as far as answers. Your staff, is anybody else staff that's here today that works here? Okay, both of you are as well. I do have a sheet of paper that can be copied off that gives you some indications of what the staff can do to make life easier and more helpful for the resident. Okay, let's just start out with a written definition, if you will, of Alzheimer's disease so that you will have an idea what we're dealing with. I'm sure most of you do. Number one, it is physical death of brain cells. That means it is a physical illness. It is not a mental illness. You cannot treat it with pills and other types of behavior. You need to know that it's a physical illness that needs to be dealt with. It's a slow, progressive memory loss with plaques and tangles, and we'll talk about plaques and tangles a little bit later with an overhead, that interrupt the nerve pathways for which there is no known cause of treatment. Now, we do have some medications out there, and we're going to talk about some of those. But right now, to say that we actually have a treatment for Alzheimer's, we don't. Devastating illness, physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially for the victim and the family and friends. Until I cut out the article that is coming around, the newest looking print, I have down here number 3 cause of death in America. They have now moved it up to number 1. It is the number 1 cause of death. You really don't die with Alzheimer's. You die with an opportunistic infection, stroke, could be anything else, but you have no reserve, no way to fight. And it can be a disease of young people through the elderly. The youngest one I know of was 26. Came from a family that had enormous amounts of Alzheimer's disease in it. She was diagnosed at like 27, 28, had a 4-year-old, well-educated lady. To this day, I'm not sure what her situation is right now. I have met her husband, but at this point, I don't really know where she is at. One of the facts we do know, and some of us have gray hair, 1 out of 4 over 65 will get Alzheimer's disease. And that is, if you live long enough. The longer you live, the more likely you are to develop it. Most Down syndrome people, we are dealing with chromosome 21, which is the problem with Alzheimer's, with our Down syndrome people. And those people develop Alzheimer's disease after 40. Some connection there somewhere. This says 2.5 million people are victims of the disease in America. It's way over that now. Park Davis has put it at something like 20 million by the year 2020. There are 8 different kinds of Alzheimer's. We have that's gotten by the young, which, as I said, 26. My husband happened to be 47 when he developed his. His dad developed it at 53, which tells us that his is inherited. Old, yes, we have the old Alzheimer's. My mother had the elderly Alzheimer's. She was 86 when she died. She was clear as a bell till she was about 83 or 84. And then we began to see little slips here and there. But it wasn't anything really too important. Until one day we took her to the doctor, and I said, "Mom, do you want to sit in the living room for a while?" And she said, "Well, I don't believe I've ever been out in this room before." You talk about being rocked back on your heels. My mother had been at my house innumerable times. It can be inherited. If it is inherited, which my husband has, there is 50% chance that our children will develop Alzheimer's disease. I haven't bothered to tell them that. I don't think that's important. Some kind of an environmental trigger. By that we mean smoke, working in coal mines, handling lasers, doing some of those environmental triggers could do something in that area. Head injury. I have 2 boys that have had head injuries, and they're a real concern to me. We get down into the genetics, you're going to see that you have to have something with the head injury in order to be concerned about Alzheimer's. We have the slow variety, which is what my husband has. We've had it for 20 years, and when I say we, that's who's had it. We have had it. He's had it, and I've had it with him. Then we have the fast, people who are diagnosed and within 3 or 4 years they're gone. We don't know the difference. And then we have those who are violent. and some of them are really violent. There's some violent things we need to be very careful of. Let's see if we can get to overhead. I turn on.
Underneath right
Under?
The little flap thing, just lift it up. There you go. It should be right.
Okay. Boy. No. Is it plugged in?
Should be right. Let's look here. It's hidden.
Oh, you have to really hunt.
Yeah.
One thing is, you find out where the switch is on the overhead before you start out.
You want this off, Grace, or
Yes, please.
is that?
Let's see if we can bring it up just a little bit. Okay. Now, where do I stand that I'm not in your way? I'm going to stand back so that, oops, we need a little adjustment. Now, come on, you got to adjust here somewhere. No, that doesn't adjust it. I want it. I don't know, is that better or worse? Okay, let's go with that. I'll try to stay out of your way. I'll stand still and you look around me, all right? Talking about plaques and tangles. Plaques and tangles are created by material that is built up on the inside around the nerves. What it does is it shuts off the pathways for the nerves. It gets into the nerves, it shuts them off, it slows them down. Tangles are the long tails that go out, that get caught and are twisted around, that make your people lose their ability to think, to regenerate, and to do all of those things. When they talk about degeneration, when there is a doctor out of Iowa City that, if you ever get to hear him, I hope you will take the opportunity to do so. His name has escaped me at this moment. I know him as well as I know my own. But he always talks about the hippocampus. Now, for those of you who aren't medical people, if you take your head and just go like this and would just cut off like this, there is an open area in the center of your brain. If that open area is very large and they have symptoms, that used to be our best way to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. If the area is large and they don't have any symptoms, it doesn't have anything to do with it. But the hippocampus runs right around the outside of this area where the spinal fluid comes up, circulates in the brain, and goes back down again. It can be very large with no symptoms and they have no Alzheimer's. But if it's large with symptoms, that was our diagnosis. That was the way we made our diagnosis. And the hippocampus lays right around the edge, and it is the one that causes the brain to shrivel up. As it dies, the brain goes from being like this, a nice, tight, fingers together, firm type of material, to like this, all caved in the center. The last time we were at Iowa City with Bill, they did a MRI and they were amazed that he was still walking around, that he was still able to understand that I got up and left the room, and he came right with me because I was his security blanket. They did not understand, they couldn't believe that he was walking, that he would recognize things. Now, he hasn't talked for several years, but I think part of that is just the frustration of not being able to say what he wants to say, okay? Hippocampus is what you listen for when you listen to somebody talking about Alzheimer's disease. The theories, toxins, that may mean any kind of an odor, any kind of a gas that's given off, working in mines, working in machinery shops, being around road material. Are some of these things part of it? We don't know. Neurochemical deficits. We know that there are some things that are missing as far as the brain is concerned with these people who have Alzheimer's. There's about 45 or 50 of them. But acetylcholine Acetylcholine and choline are the two things that seem to come up on everybody, no matter what. They cannot find a way to replace that. They're trying very hard, but if they could replace that, they think maybe there's a possibility this could slow it down. Normal aging, I'd pitch out. I have seen people 105. We have a lady in Ottumwa that's 105 years old, just recently has gone to Pennsylvania Place, done her own housework. She did allow her son to hire somebody to mow the grass, but she did her own grocery shopping. She did everything. She's sharp as a tack. She talked to her granddaughter one day, and the granddaughter said, "Oh, Grandma, you're going to be 102. It's your next birthday." She said, "Yes, and if I live 98 more years, I'll be 200. And that's just the way she is. She's just right on top of everything. So age, I don't think, has a lot to do with it. Genetics, yes. Yes, but it must be early on Alzheimer's. That's where you see your genetics, is your early on Alzheimer's. And when they say CDAT, senile, the word senile simply means before 65. It doesn't mean because you can't think. We say they're senile, they have a problem. No, senile means before 65. Senile dementia of the Alzheimer's type. Infections, we think, have something to do with it, and we know that is one thing that will kill an Alzheimer's victim, is infection. They have no fight. Abnormal proteins, that's what builds your plaque and your tangles, is your abnormal protein. Multiple infarcts, that just simply means blood clots. When you have a stroke, you have a blood clot. It may be caused from a blood clot. There's other reasons, but you may get a blood clot would cause a stroke. You may cause your heart attack. It may be a problem if it lands in the lung. But multiple infarcts, multiple time after time after time, little blood clots. And then we come to the one that's probably really the biggest answer, and that's that it's a total mystery. We don't know everything we would like to know about that.
Medicine.
I'm sorry?
What about medicine?
There are some medicines. Aricept seems to be the one that works the best.
I mean, will any medicines cause it?
Medicine, no. No. If medicine can cause, and we're going to get to that in a minute, the difference between delirium and our dementia. We're going to have that on the next one. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Cognitive impairment. Cognitive simply means you can't think the way you used to. I can't think today the way I used to. I have cognitive impairment when it comes to names. Usually the way I start out when I'm going to do an Alzheimer's presentation is to say, how many times this week have you walked in the other room 3 times before you finally came back with what you went after to get? And everybody kind of goes, oh. No, that's just because you're busy. Alzheimer's is a permanent inability to think. Permanent inability to think. They can't learn new things. Their short-term memory is what's missing. Long-term memory, they may be able to talk to you about some things 50 years ago, but they can't talk to you about things that happened 5 minutes ago. Or if you say, did you have breakfast this morning? I don't think so. They ate a big breakfast. They had pancakes and eggs and bacon and sausage and, drank 3 cups of coffee, but they don't remember that. Altered logic, reason, and judgment. Logic and reason and judgment are things like when somebody's cutting a tree down and they're cutting off a 6-foot section of it, you don't go over and try to catch it. But my husband did. I left him out there with a guy cutting down the tree, and thank goodness I went back out just in time because he said he was going to catch that big 6-foot thing that was this big around. That's because he didn't realize he couldn't catch it. He was just being helpful. Logic, reason, and judgment. They don't know about hot. They don't know about cold. They don't know how far something is. They don't know how high something is off of the ground, which is why they need to be in a safe environment. Sensory deprivation. We have 5 senses. They lose their sense of smell. They lose their sense of being able to see and know whether there is up or down when they see a line in the pavement. Is that a step up? Is that a step down? And you will find them that they scoot their feet along like this. That's what they're doing. They're scooting their feet along because there's lines and they don't know whether that's a step up or step down, and they don't want to fall. They lose their ability to hear sometimes. They lose their ability to touch. They do what's called tactile wandering, and we'll get to that in a minute. But all of their senses are less than what they used to be. Here's your difference. You can have delirium caused by medication. Medication can create problems that make you appear as if you have a dementia, and dementia simply means inability to remember, inability to think, inability to do those things. Delirium will come on quickly, it is treatable, and it is spotty. It will come and go. It will come and go if you have that. If you haven't had any problem with remembering and you start a new medication and boy, you can't remember which way it is to get out the door or where to go to the drugstore or, hey, no. Alzheimer's doesn't hit like that. Dementia is slow, it is treatable, and it is progressive. The one thing you have to remember is there's no way that we can stop this disease right now. We can slow it down. We can do some things if we get it early enough. We can do some things for them. But Ronald Reagan, in some of the articles that I have there, Ronald Reagan was diagnosed too late. And yet he had been our president till what? Very shortly before he announced that he had Alzheimer's disease. They can continue to work in a normal environment. you know, and the white puffy things on top. He would go out and just mow where the dandelions were. Wherever there was a dandelion, he'd go mow that, and then he'd come in and say he mowed the yard. And so we had all these little curlicues around all over the yard, which obviously was not Bill. Difficulty with activities of daily living. Can't take a shower, can't go to the bathroom on their own, can't brush their teeth, put their clothes on backwards, wrong side out, inside out. You're getting right down to the wire where they're going to have to be taken care of all the time. Unable to perform activities of daily living, more difficult, like feeding yourself. Limited speech. Some people talk till the day they die. And their speech is just fine. They can tell you exactly what they want to say, and there's not a problem at all. Other people quit talking because they can't say what they want to. We had a gentleman that was with Bill at Knoxville at the daycare, and he just quit talking. He knew absolutely what you were saying to him, but he just simply quit talking because when he opened his mouth, if he wanted to say this, it came out that. If he saw a horse, it came out wash machine. And he finally just gave up and refused to talk, but he knew very much what you were saying to him. Bill lost his speech completely before March of '95, which is where when he went to Good Samaritan Center in Ottumwa. Loss of bowel and bladder control. That can also become from over-medication, trying to calm people down, trying to get them to do what you want them to do, trying to make them fit into your square mold. It isn't going to work. He was somewhere for a couple of weeks, and when he came back, they had medicated him to the point where he did not have any bowel and bladder control whatsoever anymore, has not had since that time. Infections are a real major problem. They have a very low ability to fight infections. If you can keep their temperature, keep them from catching a pneumonia, if you can keep them getting bladder infection, if you can keep them from getting an infection in any area of their body, whatever it may be, you can keep them alive. But infections will kill them, and that's what they will die from. And there will be one hit bill one of these days that we will not be able to control, and that will be that. Loss of affect or your expression, and Bill has done that several years ago. He could still grin and smile when he was helping me with the chicken business, but it got to where he couldn't help me anymore. I sold it in '93, and very shortly thereafter, Bill lost all of his facial expression, whatever. The only thing he does these days is laugh, if that's what you want to call it, and it becomes a cry. He starts out with an ah, and then it becomes crying. Excuse me, doesn't cry any tears, just the sound, just the noise. Well, I insist on coughing today for some reason. What's really important when you're talking to Alzheimer's victims, and I don't care what stage they're in, this amounts to everybody. In fact, it amounts to all people, I guess. Speak to them in a quiet voice. Now, yeah. I can't hear you.
Would you like a drink of water? Would you like a drink of water?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Thank you. I don't know why, but I don't cough ever. Speak to them in a quiet voice. Make sure they can hear you. Now, don't talk like this. You have to talk loud enough and distinctly enough that they can hear you. But don't make it loud. Don't holler. Just because they can't remember doesn't mean you have to. They're deaf, you know. Gentle touch. When you come up to one of them, don't ever stand right directly in front of them. Don't confront them. Kind of stand off to the side, very relaxed appearance. Get their attention, whether it's just touching their arm or what, but get their attention. And make sure that you make eye contact. Don't look around like this everywhere else while you're talking to them. Maintain eye contact. Keep that eye contact, because that tells them that you're talking to them. Otherwise, they don't know. You walk up behind them and start talking. They don't see anybody, so must not be talking to me. They don't know that. You have to get their attention. If they act like, I don't know what you said, I don't know what you're talking about. Repeat exactly the same thing. It's time to take your shower. It's time to take your shower. Don't get irritated, don't raise your voice, don't look like you're upset with them. Just honestly and gently repeat the same thing over and over until they get the idea. If they're standing there, if you know what the word is that they want, give it to them. I don't think I was ever so aggravated at anybody as I was my sister-in-law that lives in Des Moines. She said, "Oh," I said, "Tell him who you are."